There is a rock sitting on your kitchen table right now. You can buy a kilo of it for less than the price of a bus ticket, and you probably spill it without a second thought. Here is what that same rock used to do. It decided where the first cities were built. It was carried across the Sahara and traded for gold. It funded empires in China and chained men to the oars of France's galleys. It is the only rock we eat, and for most of human history, it was power. By the end of this story, the shaker on your table is going to look like a fallen king. To understand why, forget flavor. Before the refrigerator, salt was not a seasoning. It was the only reliable way to keep food from rotting. Pack a fish in salt and it lasts months instead of days. Salt a leg of pork and you can survive a winter, cross an ocean, feed an army on the march. And your body has no choice in the matter either. Nerves fire and muscles move on dissolved salt. And since we sweat it out constantly, we die without more. So every settlement on Earth faced the same brutal math: find salt or fail. Archaeologists keep finding the same pattern again and again. Where there was a salt spring, a salt lake, a coastline good for evaporating seawater, towns grew rich. Some of the oldest cities we know of sit next to salt. Rome understood this better than anyone. One of the oldest roads out of the city is literally named for it, the Via Salaria, the Salt Road, hauling salt from the coastal pans up into the hills. Which brings us to the most famous salt fact in the world, the one you have probably heard. Roman soldiers, the story goes, were paid in salt, and that is why we call a paycheck a salary. It is a lovely story. It is also almost certainly wrong. Historians who went digging for the source found no ancient text that says it. The claim seems to trace back to an Italian dictionary from 1771, and the Pliny quote that gets passed around to support it turns out to be a fabrication. The word salarium really does carry salt inside it, and some scholars think it may have started as an allowance for buying salt. But no legion ever queued up on payday for a sack of white crystals. Think about what that means, though. Salt was so valuable for so long that we invented a false memory about it, and the whole world believed it for 2.5 centuries. The true stories are stranger anyway. Walk south from the Mediterranean, deep into the Sahara, and you reach a place called Tagaza, where the ground itself is rock salt. Miners cut it into slabs the size of doors, and the settlement was so far from anything else that its buildings were made of salt blocks, walls of the very treasure being dug. Camel caravans, sometimes 1,000 animals long, each camel hauling 2 slabs of about 90 kilos, carried that salt south for weeks toward the gold fields of West Africa. And there the exchange became legend. In the markets of Timbuktu, salt at times traded for gold at close to equal weight. One 14th century traveler reported that further south, where salt was scarcest, a slab could fetch double its weight in gold dust. Let that settle for a second. White crystals, valued like treasure, because gold cannot preserve your food or keep your body alive, and salt can. Rulers noticed what merchants knew. In China, the state of Qi figured it out nearly 3,000 years ago. Control the salt, and you tax every single person in the kingdom without ever knocking on a door, because everyone must buy it. The salt monopoly became one of the oldest state monopolies on Earth and helped fund, among other things, dynasties and great walls. Salt built fortunes in Europe, too. Venice ran on it before it ran on spices, and an alpine city grew so wealthy on the trade that its name still confesses the source, Salzburg, the Salt Castle. But nowhere did salt shape history more violently than in France. From the 14th century, the French crown taxed salt through a system called the gabelle, and it grew into one of the most hated taxes in European history. The rules were absurd. In some regions, salt was cheap. In others, the price was many times higher. And in much of the country, every person over the age of 8 was required to buy a fixed amount of state salt each year, whether they needed it or not. So, of course, people smuggled. They were called faux sauniers, the false salt makers, and they moved cheap salt into expensive regions by night, on foot, in false-bottomed carts, even with dogs carrying little salt packs. The punishments tell you exactly how much money was at stake. Caught unarmed, a smuggler could be sentenced to as much as 10 years rowing in the galleys. Caught armed, he could be executed for carrying the same crystals you shake onto chips. When the revolution came, the fury over the gabelle was part of the fuel. In 1790, the new National Assembly abolished it and amnestied the convicted smugglers, and the salt tax went down in history as a warning about what happens when a state stands between people and something their bodies require. The British Empire did not read the warning. In colonial India, the British held a legal monopoly on salt and taxed it, in a country where a day of labor in tropical heat makes salt a daily medical need. In 1930, Mohandas Gandhi chose it as the perfect target. He walked from his ashram toward the sea at Dandi, about 240 miles in 24 days, with the crowd growing behind him at every village. And at the shoreline, he bent down and picked up a handful of natural salt. That was the entire crime. A man lifting salt from a beach, breaking the monopoly law in front of the world's cameras. Tens of thousands of Indians followed him into illegal salt making and into jail, and the empire found itself arresting people for gathering seawater. The Salt March did not end British rule by itself, but it cracked something open that never closed again. The cheapest thing on your table helped take down the most powerful empire of its age. So what happened? How did the treasure of Tagaza and the terror of the gabelle become the thing restaurants give away for free? 2 quiet revolutions. First, geology caught up with us. Salt was never actually rare. Whole ancient seas lie buried underground as beds of rock salt hundreds of meters thick on every continent. Once industrial mining and drilling could reach them in the 19th century, and railways could move the stuff cheaply, the supply became effectively infinite. Second, the refrigerator arrived and killed salt's greatest job. For thousands of years, most salt was bought to preserve food. Cold storage did it better, and the single most important reason for salt's power simply evaporated. Prices collapsed. The king was dethroned not by war, but by abundance. Today, the world produces hundreds of millions of tons of salt a year, and most of it never touches food at all. It de-ices roads. It feeds chemical plants. The shaker on your table holds maybe 50 grams, worth a fraction of a cent, of the substance that built Salzburg, gilded Timbuktu, manned the galleys of France, and handed Gandhi his most elegant weapon. Fallen kings do not usually sit this quietly. So the next time someone asks you to pass the salt, take a second to notice what is actually moving across the table. Every food has an origin story. This is Foodling.